Alright, so first off, quick apology for the weirdly inconsistent releases over the past few weeks. This is a really busy time of the year for me with the day job, and also with the chaos of the holidays closing in, it's been a little bit crazy. But I am going to try to get back to 2 releases a week, or at the very least 1 release a week as we get closer to Christmas, and then after that, hopefully I will hit the ground running in 2023. But for now, even though it's been busy, I did squeeze in some time to play some games on the Steam Deck in November. Specifically, I was very pumped for the autumn sale, and I hope you got some good games too. But here are a few of the games that I picked up from the autumn sale, and really probably the bulk of my pickups, I would say, for the month of November. So let's just go ahead and dive right in with Disc Room. Now, the only reason I'm really familiar with Disc Room is because Special Reserve Games, or it might have been Limited Run Games, actually did a physical version of this for the Nintendo Switch. And I remember seeing the trailer for it, and for whatever reason, time just got away from me and I completely forgot to pre-order it. So whenever I saw that it was on sale for the autumn sale, I was like, alright, awesome, this is a great opportunity to pick it up and actually see how it plays on the Steam Deck. Now, I've only played it a little bit, and the premise is pretty straightforward. You enter a variety of rooms, and they are just filled with spinning, terrifying discs that will tear you apart. And it's your job to make sure that you can avoid these spinning death traps long enough to make it to the next stage. It's got a really cartoonish, hand-drawn sort of art style, and one of the things that I wasn't expecting about this game is it does actually have a story mode, albeit a very streamlined one that's actually just told through hand-drawn panels that kind of slide around comic book style. But story aside, the primary draw here for me was the gameplay. I've just always been a big fan of top-down 2D action-heavy affairs where it requires twitchy reflexes to stay alive, and that's exactly what Disc Room gives you. Now, I think you can beat the entire game in just a few hours. However, I think this is one of those games that really does offer a lot in the way of replay value, because there's always that pull to revisit previous stages and just see if you can beat your previous best time. And I think games like this work, sort of like in the vein of Hotline Miami, I guess, because as soon as you die, it's very easy to quickly get back into the action. Because if it were not quick to get back into the action, I can see how a game like this would get really frustrating really quickly. But thankfully that's not the case with Disc Room, and it's really easy to get back into the action. I'm very excited to see how some of the later levels in this game actually ramp up the difficulty with more and more varieties of spinning obstacles to avoid. The next game that I grabbed during the autumn sale was Blazing Chrome. This was another game that I first learned about through the Nintendo Switch and never really had any inclination to play it on the PC, but naturally all of that changed whenever I got my hands on the Steam Deck. And I'm happy to say that it performs really well on the Steam Deck, which is probably to be expected considering it is a 16-bit era throwback in the vein of something like Contra. But as much as I like the in-game look of that 16-bit, crunchy, pixelated aesthetic, I also like all of the design language that sort of surrounds everything that's happening in Blazing Chrome, mostly the fact that it has a really campy, B-movie sort of 80s science fiction action aesthetic. But as much as it comes off intentionally cheesy, the gameplay is definitely not, because it is a brutally difficult game. Maybe not the hardest game that I've ever played, but it didn't take long after I started playing around with it to realize, yeah, this is going to take a lot of repetition and learning enemy patterns and making sure that I know the exact right route through a level if I'm ever going to hope to make any progress in it. Because frankly, I've just never been the best at these sorts of games, even though I thoroughly enjoy them, and if you take a modern game in this vein and slap a retro coat of paint on it, even if it's only lightly an homage to games like Contra or Gunstar Heroes, I'm probably going to be excited to play it, so yeah, that's why I decided to grab this one as well during the autumn sale. Speaking of brutal difficulty, this next game is one that I only know about because I watch Tim Rogers' video reviews frequently, and for the eagle-eyed goblins among you who might have spotted some references to Tim Rogers in my videos, this one is for you, and that is Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. Now, apparently this game was really in fashion a couple of years back with streamers because it just lent itself so well to rage quitting and probably also to speedrunning. I think I saw a few videos that feature that as well, but the premise is this. You play as a man who is stuck in a pot with a Yosemite hammer, and using only your upper body strength and the Yosemite hammer, you have to climb a mountain. However, there are no checkpoints to speak of, so if you are right near the top of the mountain and about to roll credits and somehow mess up and fall all the way back down, you will have to start over all the way from the beginning. However, I guess you're not technically completely alone as you try to continue your desperate struggle to the top of the mountain, because periodically the creator of the game will weigh in with some light narrative and musings as you continue to just climb your way up. Now, I haven't played this with a mouse and keyboard or a proper controller yet. All I can say is that I've only played it using the analog sticks on the Steam Deck so far, and it's really tricky. Nothing about the design of this game screams to me that the controls are imprecise or somehow wrong or they're badly designed. They're just designed in a way that's not overly intuitive, so it definitely takes some getting used to. So far, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy has been exactly what I expected it would be, and that is a completely unforgiving challenge, but one that I think is manageable in sort of a Dark Souls kind of way. Meaning that it's utterly exact in its expectations of the player, but also twice as rewarding whenever you conquer, getting to that next level. And I'm not sure if I'll ever beat Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, but I have to say this sort of indie affair is exactly the kind of game that I enjoy, so if you're somebody who also likes a more indie flair to your games and one that's going to be punishing in its difficulty, then you should probably also check it out. And speaking of brutal difficulty, this next game is one that I was very curious about when I first saw the trailer for it. However, I passed on it at the time, reasoning that sooner or later I would be able to find it on sale, and luckily it was on sale for the autumn sale, and that is Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection. When I was a kid, about 9 or 10 years old, and I had a Super Nintendo, my parents' friends actually bought me a copy of Super Ghouls and Ghosts for the Super Nintendo, and at first glance I assumed, oh, this is just going to be like a Mario game. But man, I was not prepared for the brutal difficulty that I would encounter in that game, and to this day I still haven't beat it. But I had a whole lot of fun with it, even though I lost just over and over. Now, when this first came out, I wasn't sure how I felt about the hand-drawn graphic style that was on display here. Normally that's something that's a plus for me, but as somebody who grew up playing, I guess not the original, but one of the original entries in the Ghosts and Goblins series, I wasn't sure how much I would enjoy it, but I have to say, trailer footage really doesn't do it justice, and when you're actually playing it, it looks really good. Also, I should point out that I wasn't very clear on where this actually landed in the chronology for Ghosts and Goblins, because at first I thought it was just like a reboot or maybe a spiritual reboot, and even now I'm not really sure if it's a true sequel or not, because apparently Super Ghouls and Ghosts that I played on the Super Nintendo was the third entry in that series, and I think the first one was Ghosts and Goblins, then you had Ghouls and Ghosts, and then Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I think that is correct, but if you're somebody who's old hat at this and knows that game series better than I do, please let me know in the comments below. But nonetheless, it provided exactly what I expected, although I will say with a little bit of an easier mode, because there were checkpoints and there are ways that you can play the game that make it substantially easier than the way that I used to remember playing Super Ghouls and Ghosts back in the day. So a combination of just sort of pulling on my nostalgic heartstrings, a really solid presentation, and the sort of gameplay that felt exactly the way I remembered playing it when I was like 9 or 10 years old was enough for me to go ahead and take the leap on this one, particularly since it was on sale. So if you've never played it before, be ready for a challenge, although if you have played the series before, I think you will find something to enjoy here, and I wouldn't let the trailer be off-putting if you were like me and like, ooh, that art style doesn't look that great. I promise it's better in action. And finally, the last game that I grabbed for this list was Metro 2033 Redux. Now, a few of you in the comments had actually recommended this game, and I actually did have a copy of it, albeit it was the Switch physical copy. And when I played it on there, I really liked the way that it felt, because it did not feel like the traditional like high-octane first-person shooter that I was expecting, but rather it does feel like a slower, more meandering sort of first-person shooter that truly is survival horror. And I have to say the depressing, mostly underground atmosphere of this game was really just enough to kind of draw me in, but the gameplay is really solid too, and the fact that it really does have a really strong narrative, because I believe it is actually based on a novel, was enough for me to give it a second look. Now, I did play this a little bit on the Steam Deck so far, and the performance was okay. At first I was getting like 30 to 40 frames per second, but ultimately I ended up bumping the graphics down to medium so I could get a more solid 60 frames per second. But as much as I love the way the game looked on the Switch, it's clear to me that it looks much better on PC, which I guess is to be expected obviously. But on the Steam Deck too, I thought even at medium settings, it looked pretty good. Maybe a little bit fuzzy, but honestly, I don't mind a little bit of fuzziness in the image as long as the trade-off is a 60 FPS, particularly when a game looks this good anyways from an artistic standpoint, so I don't get too caught up in the technical side of graphics. But yeah, long story short, if you've never played it before, I think it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're looking for a first-person shooter experience, again, that is not so much run and gun and shoot everything that moves, but you have to carefully consume your ammo. However, I do appreciate that the developers gave you the option right out of the gate to choose how you want to approach the game. So if you wanted to run and gun, they'll actually give you more resources and ammo, or if you're somebody who's more of an old school horror fan and you like the idea of sparse resources and doing your best to survive in unfriendly terrain, then you can also just go for the old school original difficulty, which will scale back the number of resources that are doled out to you. But yeah, ultimately I've only played this game for a few hours on the Nintendo Switch, and I'm jumping back in here, so I'm hoping to spend some more time with it sometime during the holidays, even though this really doesn't feel like the best game for the holidays, although I guess it is one that is pretty consistent with a cold winter, so there you go. Alright, so that's it for this one. I just didn't want to let November get too far away from me and forget to do a video about the games that I picked up during the autumn sale. But hey, what about you? Did you get any cool stuff during the autumn sale, or really just November period? If so, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch videos on this channel. I really, really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.